Alright, what we're looking at here is a steaming pile of corporate and political hypocrisy that's so obvious it hurts. And they thought they were slick? Yeah, sure. Let's start with the Afrikaner identity, because nothing says, "we're special," like a bunch of white settlers deciding that they're God's gift to the African continent. This identity was built like a damn fortress of paranoia, born out of centuries of isolation, oppression from the British, and a sprinkling of good old-fashioned chosen people syndrome. They weren't just trying to be Dutch 2.0. No, they cooked up this Afrikaner nationalist crap to justify apartheid, to carve out a nice little racial hierarchy where they, shocker, sat on top. They wanted control, absolute control. But not just over the land, the wealth, and the black majority, they wanted control over the narrative. To sell this to the world, they wrapped it all up in religious nonsense and a mythological history where they were the brave pioneers, or as they called themselves, Voortrekkers. Afrikaner nationalists were trying to achieve a permanent structure where black South Africans were permanently under their boots, with laws designed to keep it that way forever. They were scared of being outnumbered by the black majority, and so apartheid was their master plan to avoid getting replaced or having to share anything with people of color. And then you got Britain and the US looking over at South Africa and saying, huh, apartheid's kinda gross, but hey, have you seen the diamonds? Have you seen the gold? Let's not rock the boat too much, eh? British corporations like De Beers, the Diamond Kings, and Anglo-American, massive mining overlords, were practically swimming in wealth mined by black laborers who were paid less than peanuts. That's right, less than peanuts. And all they had to do to keep that sweet, sweet profit flowing was not care that their business model was basically human exploitation wrapped in racist policies. And they didn't care. De Beers practically owned the diamond market, and apartheid kept their labor costs so low they might as well have been robbing graves. Anglo-American? They were the biggest mining company in South Africa, and you better believe they were thrilled to take advantage of apartheid's enforced black poverty to keep their labor costs at rock bottom. It wasn't a win-win, it was a win-lose, with the lose being the black majority who had no choice but to work for pennies under horrid conditions while these corporations laughed all the way to the bank. But it wasn't just British companies playing footsies with apartheid. Oh no. Let's hop across the Atlantic to good old American corporations. You've got IBM, because of course IBM's gotta be involved when it comes to some authoritarian government surveillance project. They helped the apartheid regime build a pass law system that would make George Orwell blush. IBM's computers were used to track, monitor, and control the movements of black South Africans. How many times do we need to see this before we stop letting corporations play Big Brother? But it gets better, or worse. How about Ford and General Motors? They didn't just have factories in South Africa, no, no, no. They loved apartheid. Why? Because it meant that they could pay black workers less than what they'd tip a valet in New York. They made cars in apartheid-era South Africa, knowing full well that racial segregation and oppression were baked into the system. But hey, why pay a fair wage when apartheid could handle that inconvenience for you? And let's not forget about Coca-Cola, because even apartheid can't ruin a brand as squeaky clean as Coke, right? Wrong. Coca-Cola made a killing selling its sugary poison while ignoring the fact that apartheid made sure they could operate at a low cost, never once stopping to question whether maybe, just maybe, doing business in a white supremacist state was a bad look. But hey, profits first, right? And now, the political side of things. Let's bring in Reagan and Thatcher, the freedom-loving icons of the West. You'd think with all their talk about democracy and human rights, they'd be first in line to tell South Africa to knock it off with all the racial segregation. Nope. Reagan came up with this term, constructive engagement, which is basically fancy talk for, let's keep doing business with these racist assholes and hope they change their ways. And Thatcher? She couldn't even bring herself to support sanctions against the apartheid regime. She said sanctions would hurt the black population, which is peak hypocrisy considering the black population was already being crushed under apartheid. It's like not throwing a life preserver to someone who's drowning because it might hit them in the face. And don't even get me started on the banks and oil companies. Barclays Bank was operating in South Africa for decades, funneling money to apartheid businesses, helping finance this racist system because guess what? Apartheid was good for business. It kept the local economy rigged in favor of white-owned corporations. Shell and BP, they were supplying the apartheid regime with the oil it needed to keep running. And without oil, the whole apartheid economy would have ground to a halt. So yeah, these companies weren't just passive bystanders, they were active participants in that system. And the media? Western outlets in the early days were either looking the other way or framing apartheid as some kind of necessary evil. They weren't calling it out for what it was, a brutal, dehumanizing regime designed to prop up a minority of white people while keeping black South Africans in economic chains. Because, uncomfortable truths don't sell as many papers. Let's go back to Margaret Thatcher and her little love affair with apartheid. Here's a woman who supposedly hated communism so much she had no problem cozying up to one of the most oppressive, racist systems on the planet, apartheid South Africa, all because it fit into her narrative. Now, there's Mangosuthu Buthelezi, a Zulu prince who was South Africa's king of fence-sitting. He played the apartheid game, leading the Inkatha Freedom Party and pretending to be all for Zulu pride and self-determination. But let's be real, his stance on apartheid was about as clear as mud in a rainstorm. He didn't outright oppose it, instead he was content to work within the system, which let the apartheid regime say, "Look, a black leader who isn't mad at us. We must be doing something right." Meanwhile, Thatcher had a Marshall Plan for South Africa, and by plan I mean she wagged her finger saying sanctions weren't the answer, all while turning a blind eye to the horror show happening in front of her. She wanted gradual change, as if a system where millions are oppressed based on their skin color needed time to evolve into something less evil. Yeah, sure, Maggie. That's like telling the wolves to take their time deciding when to stop eating the sheep. Spoiler alert, the wolves never stop. Now let's shift gears to JP Morgan and some of the other corporate ghouls who saw apartheid as a money-making opportunity. JP Morgan, good old American banking royalty, was in the thick of it, offering loans and financial support to keep apartheid chugging along. Let me spell it out for you. Without big bank loans, the South African government would have had a hell of a time keeping their boot on the neck of black South Africans. But hey, when there's profit to be made, who cares about a few human rights violations, right? And it wasn't just J.P. Morgan. Chase Manhattan, led by the Rockefeller family, did their part too, making sure apartheid had the money to keep going. You've got to hand it to them, folks. They knew how to hedge their bets on racism. Citibank? Oh, they're in there too, cutting deals like apartheid was just another Tuesday. And let's not forget Barclays, the UK's own financial darling, happily funneling money to support the regime while pretending they had some kind of moral high ground. And when people finally started protesting, they didn't leave because it was the right thing to do. They bailed because it was bad PR. And what about the corporate players? Oh, we've got the real Hall of Fame here. General Motors cranking out cars while apartheid ran full steam ahead. Ford, same deal, selling cars in South Africa like nothing was happening. IBM getting cozy with the apartheid regime by providing the tech that kept the whole damn thing running smoothly. Because why just make computers when you can make computers that support state-sponsored racism? Coca-Cola? Oh yeah, sugary drinks for a sour regime. And Shell, Big Oil couldn't stay out of it, keeping those apartheid cars running on apartheid gasoline. Let's not forget Anglo American, the mining giant that made a killing, probably literally too, off the backs of exploited black labor. So we've got these banks and corporations supporting a racist regime while giving exactly zero fucks about the human cost. They all knew what apartheid was, but money talked louder than morality. And they stayed until the protests got too loud. Not because they suddenly found their consciences, but because it was bad for business. These people don't have souls. They have balance sheets. So, in the end, apartheid wasn't just a South African problem. The West, through its corporations, its governments, and its complicity, helped create, maintain, and profit from this system of racial oppression. And that's the dirty little secret. Britain and the US didn't just stand by. They held apartheid's hand and gave it a pat on the back while quietly slipping a few bucks into their pockets. So next time someone tries to tell you apartheid was just a South African issue, you look them in the eye and say, "Yeah, right, and I'm the Queen of England."
You trouble me, Eric.